What's up, guys? It is Sam here, and today I wanted to talk about the power rankings, what we're putting together. This is episode number 4 in the series we're doing on power rankings, and that's based on what you have here in front of us. But today we're going to dive into Facebook, and we're going to take a look at the top 10 candidates that are coming up in September 12th debate for the Democratic Party for nomination for president. And we're going to look at the growth rate, and then we're going to look at two different factors, not two, but the first one's the growth rate in the following, and then the average number of likes over the most previous 30 days relative to the total number of likes on their page, because that is one measure of engagement. And then we're going to use Facebook's measure of engagement in terms of the total number of people talking about them or that page as a percentage of the total following. Why are we using percentages? Because you can compare percentages, but because the absolute numbers for these caricatures are all over the place, we want to be able to compare apples to apples, which we can do that if we compare percentages. We cannot do that when we're comparing absolute numbers, although I will touch on some of that. So I've put together 3 awesome graphs that illustrate this very, very clearly. But before we get into any of that, if this is your first time here, what's up? My name is Sam, and if you are returning, it is good to freaking see you. Before we get into the actual analysis, I wanted to pull up this Pew Research that I found. And if you look, the percentage of baby boomers, so it says 1 in 20, in 2020, 1 in 10 eligible voters will be Gen Z. So that's not actually what we're looking at here. It's predicted by 2020, though, that Millennials, Gen X, and Gen Z is going to be over 50% of the voting population. So I think that we're going to see a big change over the next, couple years of what takes place and who gets elected. Because now we have the biggest voice, right? I'm a millennial born in '84. We have the biggest voice. So I just wanted to touch on that. The power ranking, we have, I'll just touch on this quick before we actually dive into the analysis. So if you want to just jump straight to the analysis, it's probably 2 or 3 minutes after this. But what is the power ranking and why are we doing it? Well, this power ranking is just going to be like any other type of ranking for candidates for Democratic nomination to president. To run for president, except for we're going to look at the actual data, not just some poll that has an N. When I say N, that's just the sample size. In statistics, they use the nomenclature N to represent the number of people that responded to a poll. So if you have a poll, it has an N of 1,000. That means 1,000 respondents to that poll. So some of these polls have like 500 to 1,500 people responding. And based on like the statistical theories out there, having a certain sample size, you can get a representative sample of the population. However, when you look at this data relative to what we're looking at, they're 2 different things. The media says one thing and puts out one agenda, but the actual data is different. And why do I say the actual data? Because what we're going to do, and what we have been doing for the last 3 episodes, is we started out with the Google search volume. So we took each one of these 10 players, right? These are the 10 candidates that are going to be in the debate coming up in about 10 days for the candidacy for the Democratic Party. We looked at each one of them based on the search volume of their name on Google, the #1 site in the entire world. But we didn't look at it on a global basis. What we did is we looked at it specifically within the United States to see where they ranked. And then we gave them a ranking. And we did the same thing on YouTube, which is the #2 site in the world. And then that gives us a much more macro view of people's interests. Right? We could probably even just stop there. But I wanted to add in some more data. I get a comment kind of often. I feel that people don't realize the impact of the internet and social. So I included a bunch of social factors here. So if you are able to win on social, it drives business results, right? Number one. If you're able to win on social, based on some of the data that we've already seen, remember 2016, you can win on social and win a campaign. So we know it works. I've heard comments like, oh, just because they're winning on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or whatever the case is, doesn't mean there's going to be voters coming out. But we already know it drives business results. We already know that it can impact elections. I think that's more of a naive thing, like an old way of thinking about things. And that's where we get into the social aspects. So before we get into the social, we took a look at this morning's video, and that was their website. So each candidate has their own website, and we took a look at their websites to see how they ranked out of all the sites in the U.S., and then we looked at two other factors: how much time people spend on their site on average, as well as how many page views they had on each site. So if you want to check out any of those, make sure you go back to the channel, check out those. I've done tons of videos on this right now, probably about 25 so far. And this is where we start to step into the social. And we're going to look at the growth rates and a couple other factors for each one of these things. In terms of the growth rates of their following, as I mentioned, we're using growth rates because we can compare that. Then the last thing here, we might have a bonus round. I'm not exactly sure. Or I might include some of this stuff. I haven't been able to figure out how to track Instagram very well. The API for Social Blade is not working very well. But anyways, we're going to look at the number of donations and the percentage that's coming from small donors. And we're going to stack rank that. And then we're going to take the average between that and the savings rate from these campaigns, right? They raise money and then they spend money. So what's the delta on that, and what is that in terms of a savings rate? How much people are saving? And in this ranking, we're going to say a savings rate is a bad thing, right? There's not a ton of time left or a ton of debate. I mean, there's a lot of time left, but you would think that some of these people who have a high savings rate but don't have any relevance on these other factors, like YouTube, their YouTube channel, their Twitter, their Facebook, their website, their YouTube search, meaning just people interested in them, and their Google search, they might want to spend in a way to gain more relevance on these platforms, because that's where people's attention is. So that's why we're going to take a look at those. And then finally, we're going to wrap it all up by taking an average of all these to get one ranking. And we're going to compare that to Real Clear Politics and how they take what their ranking is. And we'll follow that over time. So if you want to follow along with that, make sure you press that subscribe button and that bell notification so you can get notified every time I post a new video. If you haven't already, you can go check out the video before this one, which is a shorter video of this analysis, and I just basically covered the results. But this video, we dive a little bit more into the actual details of it, the full analysis. So right here we have Pete Buttigieg or something, whatever his last name is. This is one of the metrics that we're going to take a look at, right? He's got 188,000, roughly, people talking about him. What is talking about him? Well, that's basically any possible type of engagement on Facebook. So comments, shares, likes, talking about events. There's a bunch of other things. It's probably about 10 or so, 15 different things that Facebook's toxin includes in that. So in my opinion, I think that number gets a little bit noisy and less reflective of reality. So we're using a second engagement metric as well. And if you look down here, we have the average monthly likes. This is according to Social Blade, so I'm not 100% sure. I believe this is just for the content that is created on their page. So over the past 30 days, He's had about 27,000 likes. And down here, it's got a nice steady up and to the right in terms of followers. And this is the last metric we look at. We look at the growth rate of followers over the past 12 days because that's all the data we have, right? You should see here September 2nd through August 20th. So over those 12 or 13 days, we take a look to see the growth rate and we compare that. So this is good. Let's jump over to Andrew Yang. For some reason, he is the only person, Andrew Yang, who actually picture populates for. If you look as I toggle through those, he's got 37,000. So barely anybody talking about him relative to Pete. Pete has 190,000 almost, where Andrew only has 137. So we'll take a look at that. Some of the interesting results, stay tuned for the end of this because the results at the end are going to be kind of interesting. The average number of likes on the content posted was 34,000 almost, with a daily average that's a little bit higher than Pete's. It looks like Pete's actually growing at it appears like a greater number of followers. However, he also has a shitload more followers. Andrew has 180 versus 440. Kamala Harris, she's got 1.2 million roughly, with 89,000 people talking about her. So in terms of engagement, just out of the three that we've looked at so far, without even running the numbers yet, you can clearly see that she's going to have the lowest engagement, and Pete's going to have the highest. Just because if you take this number here, the number of people talking, and divided it into that number, you would get the engagement. So you can kind of get an idea of what those numbers might be. Let's scroll down here. Oh, wow. This is further backed up when we come down here and we look at this data because the total number of likes on average is a little bit under 6,000. Remember what Pete's was? Pete's was 27,000. Andrew's was 34,000 almost. So 6,000 versus 34,000 versus 27,000. It's substantially less engaged for her following, which is kind of interesting. It looks like she was growing faster about 2 weeks ago, and then it is slowly, and over this time period, it looks like it's even slowed down more, wherever these last 2 days here versus the first 2 days here, or first couple days here, which is kind of interesting. Let's go over to Amy. So Amy is also pretty small in terms of the following, and also it looks like she's got a good engagement rate though, because she's got around 10% for her engagement rate. Seems pretty healthy. Except for the number of likes on her page is 1,800. Ooh, man, that sucks. But she did increase her growth rate. It looks like towards the end of August. I just looked at the date. Today's the 2nd of September. So looks like she's gaining some followers, which is excellent for her. I'm not sure how long she'll be in the race, but it is good. Now, Bernie Sanders is the anomaly, and this is why we can't compare. It's not a prudent thing to compare absolute numbers because he is substantially larger. Like, look at his following, 5.1 million versus 200,000. Like, it's just dwarfs it in size. So that's why we're looking at the growth rate among these things, and which is also kind of interesting. The average likes on his page are 21,000, but look at Andrew's, 34,000, and then Pete's was, 27,000. So Bernie Sanders has a tremendous following, but they're not super engaged at all. He's also gaining followers, which is good for him. Looks like a decent amount, too. It looks like, again, just like Kamala, he was growing in the first half of the past 13 days or so. He was growing at a faster rate, and then right around the middle here, it looks like it started to slow down slightly. It still is up and to the right. Like, that's awesome. Let's go over to Joe Biden. This is just conjecture, but based on the research I'm doing, I feel like, you guys can let me know down below in the comments, but I feel like Joe Biden, I know that he's polling well, but I don't think I don't think he is going to be. I don't know. Maybe we'll see. He might. I feel like he might not be the candidate for the Democratic Party. His growth rate over the first half of the past 13 days looks very meager. If you look at the growth rate for Bernie Sanders or Amy over the second pass here versus Joe Biden, he's actually picked up his growth rate, which is kind of cool. The average number of likes over on the media that he's posted on his account or on his page, or that he probably hired somebody to put up there, is 5,600. So pretty low. Remember, Bernie Sanders was 21,000. So 1/4 of that is what Joe Biden is getting. So Joe Biden's not doing super well on these rankings that I've put out so far. I don't know if his team realizes the importance and the impact of winning on these social platforms, because it really does influence things. So, like, we already know it influences elections, and we know it influences business results. That's people you're influencing through these platforms. I think if somebody thinks that social media doesn't influence voters or doesn't have the effect, they should go talk to the Russians. Or try running a business and looking at how what the impact is you can get from social media. Let's take a look at Cory Booker. Cory Booker's is interesting because he's been losing since the end of August. He's been basically losing. The first couple days over the past 13 days, he was gaining, and then it flatlined, and then he's been losing at a decent rate here in the middle. And then it just was like flatlined again. It appears he's going to be losing more followers. But he does have a lot of followers, 1.2 million, 38,000 people talking about him. The average number of likes, though, is so incredibly minuscule. There's like nobody liking his shit at all on Facebook. Elizabeth Warren, she, according to the polls, is in the top 5. She's got 3.3 million, roughly, likes with 250,000 people talking about her, 21,000 likes over the past 30 days, and she's got a nice steady up and to the right growth rate. It does look like it's right around in here where the growth rate starts to flatten out a little bit, but what we're going to do is take the delta between this, right here, 3.281386 minus this, or divided by this, to minus 1 to get a growth rate. We're going to compare those and stack rank them of all these candidates. Next we have Beto, or whatever his name is. You can let me know down below in the comments. He's also got a lot of followers too. He's got just over 900,000 with 125,000 people talking about him. The average number of likes on his page on the content that he posts was almost 19,000, 18,633. There wasn't any data on his. For some reason, there's no data pulling up in terms of the likes, so I'm not sure why, but he actually doesn't rank last. So even though he is a 0 in this, when I look at the growth rate of the channel, he has some other redeeming characteristics, so he does not come up as 10th. That goes to somebody else. The last person, which is Julian Castro, he has the smallest amount of following at 141,000, but he has a tremendous amount of people talking about it, 54,000 almost. And the engagement on his page, is practically the same as, I think it was Joe Biden. Yeah, Joe Biden's got 56 versus 5,900 likes on average over the media that he's posted on his page. So he's got a much more engaged following, which is, but then again, it's also like a 10th of the size. What was Joe Biden's, like 2 million? Joe Biden's following is 1.5 million. So he's got, basically 10 times the size. But so you would expect the engagement rate to fall a little bit as the account growth. And we'll take a look at this, right? The smaller accounts, right, this one, you would expect to be growing at a faster rate, even if the absolute numbers are exactly the same, just because the base is smaller. So now I wanted to look at those 3 charts that I put together. So we're going to jump over here, and the first one is going to look at the overall engagement. So what did I do to pull this together? Overall engagement is just essentially a ratio of this and this. We take 54,000 divided by this, but we use the actual numbers here. And we take a look at this growth rate. So Pete Buttigieg, or whatever his name is, has the highest. He's got a 42.7% growth rate, which is astonishing. That's not growth rate, engagement rate from all of the factors that Facebook uses. Remember, that might be a little bit cloudy, and I do want to touch on some anomalies in the data besides that person who didn't have any data showing up on Social Blade. The next is Julian, and he's got a 38% engagement rate. Number 3 is Andrew Yang. So we have 3 people that are not even in the top 3 showing up for overall engagement, and that was kind of like what put me into thinking about like how noisy that number really is. So we're going to jump up to the total number of likes, because I think that represents a more accurate representation of who is engaged, right? Like they actually had to click something on their phone to press the like button on this person's page for whatever content that they posted. And if you look at the previous 30 days, the total number of likes as a percentage, right, we're going to look at the engagement rate over the previous 30 days. Andrew Yang here has almost 19%. Next is Pete at 6.1%. So this is kind of interesting, right? Andrew Yang has an 18.91% engagement rate when you look at the actual likes on the media account, or the media creative that's output. And the total engagement is at 21%. So these are relatively in line. But if you look at everybody else's numbers are substantially higher when you look at the overall ranking. Like, look at Kamala Harris, right? She's got a total number of likes divided by, or the total number of likes over the previous 30 days on the content that she's put out divided by her, the likes on her page, which is 0.5%. So they're not super engaged. But remember, she's got a fuckload more people following her, but even when you look at the absolute numbers, which we're going to take a look at in a second, it's still in Andrew's favor. Like, even though he's growing at 20%, right, you're like, well, that's because he doesn't have any fucking followers, right? But when you look at the absolute numbers, meaning the actual numbers, and you compare the two numbers and not considering a growth rate, which is not necessarily the best way to do an analysis, in my opinion, when you have like such a wide variant. You have like 5.1 million versus like 140,000. You know what I mean? There's a giant disparity in the size of these characters. That's why we use the growth rate. But we will touch on the absolute numbers here. So when we look at the total number of likes, and then the last thing that we're going to jump into is we're going to look at the average of these 3 charts to come up with the overall on Facebook. Who actually is ranked number 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 5 for these characters. So the likes, the engagement over the previous 30 days, we've got Yang at 1, Pete at number 2 at 6.11%, Castro at 4.20%. Speaking of Castro, I just ran out of weed. It's 420. That's why I thought of that. Betty O'Rourke is number 4, and Elizabeth Amy is number 5. So you can see that the engagement rate favors much small players because the base is probably substantially lower. Except for Pete's. Wasn't his pretty big? 500,000. Not really. Who has the biggest here? Let's check out Amy's really quick. I'm just curious. Amy, oh, hers is tiny too. What's Elizabeth Warren's? I think hers is pretty big, like 3 million. Yeah, 3.3 million and 250. Let's come down here. 21,000. So she does have a decent number of engagement, but look at this: 21,000 likes on her page, on her content, versus Andrew Yang. He's got 34,000. I mean, it's just the growth rate shows the gigantic difference in that right here. Right, we have this growth rate on the likes versus hers. It's just substantial. So next, we're going to go up to the growth rate in the number of followers. So this one maybe I should have even given more weighting and done a weighted average instead of just an equally weighted average. I've done an unequally weighted average where I give maybe 40% or 50% to the growth rate in the following. However, I did an equally weighted. You can let me know your thoughts on the equally weighted or unequally weighted average of these three factors, right? The growth rate and the number of followers that these players have gained, the engagement rate for how many likes on the content that they post, and the overall number of people talking about them. But as we went into, I think that's a cloudy number. I don't think that's super representative. I think that Facebook puts some other factors in there that are not super relevant, but we do use it. It just has a smaller relevance, so that's why I added the likes on there. Now, we're jumping up here. As you can probably already see, it is a tie between Pete and Andrew at number 1. And if we take a look at the first one, right, the growth rate is number 2. Why does this say, what is this? Okay, so this is the growth rate in terms of the followers, which is this chart here. So the chart represents the amount of followers that they've gained over the previous 13 days. So this is pretty substantial. So think about a 10% monthly growth rate plus, right? More than a 10% monthly growth rate is astonishingly quick. He's more than double anybody else in terms of the growth rate. Look at this. He's like five times more quickly, growing almost at 5 times more quickly, 4 times as fast as Julian or Pete. And Pete's the only person who's actually growing at Facebook. Pete has either a very good person that he hired or is very good at Facebook because you can see he just stands out relative to all the other candidates. So kudos to Pete for whatever he's doing. Then we'll jump back up here and we see that basically it goes back and forth between Pete and Andrew the entire time, except for the last category, which was the chart number 3 down here. Pete came in first and Andrew came in third, right? Because we had Julian coming in second. So when we take the average of that, what we're going to do is, just so you get to see the formula, we took the average of those. So the ranking on Facebook, Andrew Yang is number 1, tied with Pete Buttigieg, whatever his name is. Number 2, at a distant number 2, is Amy. And I mean, let's be honest. Like Amy, Beto, Julian, Cory Booker, like these 4 people are probably going to drop out, or at least half of them are going to drop out before the next debate, more than likely. You guys can let me know your thoughts down below, but more than likely those 4 people, one or all of them will probably drop out before, not September's debate, but the October debate. I would expect, if something doesn't substantially change for them after September debate, I would expect at least a couple more people to drop out. Maybe not, but we'll see. So Julian's number 2 down here, and then number 4 is Amy. Because remember, this is tied, so that's why I have her down at 5th. So she's at 5th. 6th is Bernie Sanders. 7th is Kamala Harris. And if you've watched the YouTube search one, YouTube search, what's his name? Bernie Sanders is very well. Google search volume, Bernie Sanders is very well. However, when you come to Facebook, he's just like middle of the pack. So Bernie, step it up, son. You have a tremendous following on there that's just not super engaged, and that's a missed opportunity, Bernie. You should, whoever you have working in that, like start pressing them to understand how to get that engagement rate up, because you have almost double what the next closest person has, which is Elizabeth Warren, and she has more than double any of the other people. So you've got like 3 or 4x in terms of the number of followers versus the other pages. You just got to get that engagement rate up. So whatever that, you know what I mean, whatever that entails, I think it's a lot more of hand-to-hand combat and actually just like messaging and interacting and going out, right? Like just hire somebody to, $20 an hour, $15 an hour to just come do this all day and just interact with people. Like give them parameters, and keep checking up on him. But I feel like that's a huge. If you said the biggest loser in terms of this would probably be one of these two, right? We have the two biggest followings here that are ranking the worst. If you look at their growth rate, look at this over the past 2 weeks. Yes, still positive, still a great growth rate. When you look at the size of the following, right, of 5 million versus 3.3 million, it's just, I feel like there's a tremendous opportunity there. The number of likes, they are also, in terms of Bernie Sanders has the least, or he's ranked number 8th in terms of the growth rate for the likes on his page. But this is what I was talking about in terms of the absolute amounts. So I just took it all from Social Blade. As you can see, Andrew Yang is number 1 here. Pete is number 2. Bernie Sanders has the spot for number 3. But as I mentioned, we don't really go by the absolute numbers. So you could make an argument that 8 is too high for him. And I could see the validity of that. He does have a tremendous amount of likes on the media that he does post relative to a lot of the candidates. But he also has, look at him versus Pete. He's got 10x in terms of the followers. And yet he has less engagement. I feel like that's such a missed opportunity for him. Whether you say he's 8th or whether you say he's 4th or 3rd because of the absolute number, I still think it's a tremendously large missed opportunity. This is the last one, which is the super noisy one in terms of the engagement, right? This is this number here divided by this number. Excuse me. So if we come back over here to Julian, we'll see exactly that, which is right here, 53 divided by 41. That's how we come up with this ranking. I think I might do a synopsis or a paraphrasing what we've done so far and do like a half of a power ranking, and we just factor it. Let me know if you guys would like to see this. Let's do a power ranking between between Google, YouTube, their website, and Facebook. And let's just take an average of those 4 to see who's actually winning on these platforms, right? Or if you have a better gauge of relevance on Facebook, that's data that I can grab and take a look at, let me know. Or thoughts on how I might be able to strengthen this type of analysis. Another interesting observation here is Bernie Sanders has a fuckload of people talking about him. About 3x what the next closest person has, which is Elizabeth Warren. Pete has a ton of people talking about him for the size of his following. If you look over here, his following is only 450,000, and he has 190,000 people talking to him. So Pete has a ton. I don't know what he's doing, but he's clearly doing something right over there. And Bernie has a lot of people talking about him, but nobody's really interacting with his shit. So anyways, if you guys have any thoughts on any of this, or if you'd like to see that power ranking halfway through what we've done so far, let me know down below in the comments. If you want to see the short abbreviated version of this, go check out the video before this one. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm going to be doing this leading up to the debates and going forward. Maybe we'll have a prediction once a week to see who we think is going to be dropping out, and we'll definitely be covering the debate. Not in the traditional sense of covering the debate, but in the sense that how the debate impacted each one of these players based on the relevance of the data that we've been talking about in terms of Facebook and YouTube and Google and all these other platforms. So we're going to take a look at that, the impact of these things. It's kind of interesting how this stuff plays out. Don't forget to press that bell notification. If you guys want to jump over to Instagram, I have a link in the description for my Instagram. I talk a lot more about fitness over there. So if you want to come over to Instagram and say what's up, it's sometimes easier to do that over there. It's a little bit less crowded sometimes. Peace. Now let me pull up this and stop it.